Good evening, daywalkers and night stalkers. It's me, your twisted southern horror queen, coming to you live from under a full moon right here in southeastern Louisiana. Actually, I don't know if there's a full moon out there or not because it's storming its ass off right now. There might actually be a little thunder and lightning to kind of lighten the mood for us this evening. That'd be kind of cool. Hey, Gavin, I have missed you. Hey, Ronnie and Lori, glad to see you guys jumping on board tonight. A little rusty tonight, so y'all bear with me, and I'm going to try to get my creepy on for y'all because I do have all kind of crazy, creepy stories lined up for you, but you already knew that because that's why you're here, right? Hey, Jamie, glad to see you, little diva. So before we get rolling, let's get those Adrian's Fury Dragster sponsor shout-outs taken care of. Here's a big, wet, creepy chick kiss coming at you. Renegade Racing Fuel, D&M Graphics, Surreal Studios, Amelie Oil, Racers Direct, Pro Loop, and of course Naked Wines, which I am not having any Naked Wines tonight, so it's going to be a rough ride without alcohol. Anyway, we appreciate everything that you do for us and the Adrian's Fury Dragster. Hey, Chris, good to see you. Chris is the one that turned me on to Coon Hill Cemetery in Pensacola, Florida. Still getting feedback off of that, Chris. Pretty wicked little place there. Anyway, speaking of Adrian's Fury, Fury, Volume 2 of the Adrian Trilogy will be out like within the next couple of weeks or so. And the revamped version is freaking killer. It's awesome. I can't wait for you guys to see it. The book looks tight. The cover art is freaking awesome. You can check out all my books at authorlyngibson.com. There's all kind of cool stuff there. You're going to find links to the Edge Radio US as well as pictures from past events. Check it out. I got you creepy lined up for you there, and I think you're going to like what you find if you check it out. Oh, and speaking of creepy and lined up and all that kind of stuff, yeah, that reminds me. They're back. The only folks with balls big enough to sponsor the Twisted Southern Horror Queen show, the lineup. Yeah, the folks at Creepy Crate is back, folks. So have you guys checked this madness out yet? Come on, I've been telling y'all about it for like forever. Y'all are missing out on some of the most bizarre and macabre memorabilia and collector's items ever. Our demented little friends over at the lineup have been rooting around some crazy places searching for all these spooky little trinkets and freaky little freebies for all of us twisted folks, and I'm taking advantage of it. You ought to do the same thing. What's wrong with you? I love my Creepy Crate. The little mail lady shows up with prayer beads and holy water every time she drops my crate off. I love freaking her out. It's awesome. But you guys can get the same exact crates that I get every other month. So get your asses over to authorlyngibson.com. Click on the Creepy Crate logo on the right side of my homepage. And when you go to checkout, use that code TWISTED for an extra $5 off. It's just a little something extra that they do for the Twisted Southern Horror Queen Horde. That's you guys. But I got to tell you, I don't know how they could afford to do that because every single crate is just jam-packed full of all kind of creepy stuff. And we're already getting like this massive discount on everything they pack in there. And we're only paying like a third of what the actual retail value of this stuff is to begin with. And then these insane folks are giving us another $5 off. So you guys need to take advantage of that killer deal before they come to their senses. Do it now, seriously, because if they get back on their meds, that discount may disappear. And you guys would have just missed out. Can't blame me, folks, because I've been telling you guys about it for a very long time. Let me give you just a little peek at a couple of my favorite things that came in the last Creepy Crate. This is just one of the crazy things that was in there. This is a Michael Myers flask. Freaking awesome, huh? Because the new Halloween movie's coming out real soon. Y'all missed out on this one. No way to go back and get it. You do not want to miss out on the next crate because I know what's going to be in it. Can't tell it to you guys, but trust me, you don't want to miss out. And I'm going to show you one more thing. This is another one of my favorite items. This is a Hannibal Lecter inspired apron. that says I'm having an old friend over for dinner. Love it. So yeah, that's definitely going to make an appearance at the next family gathering here at the Gibson compound. Got to do it. All right, so it's about that time. Y'all know what you got to do. I know I'm rusty. Y'all are rusty. So let me remind you, it is now that time to kick the kids out, dim the lights, lock the doors, and go grab a tasty adult beverage because we're fixing to get our scary on around here. All right, so tonight we're going to kick it off in Savannah, Georgia. There's this crazy old house there. It's called the Marshall House, and it's got one hell of a reputation for being haunted. So there's been like shit tons of documented ghostly encounters by the staff, the guests, and of course paranormal investigators. And there just ain't a whole lot of anything that hadn't gone down in this house. Now this joint's on Broughton Street, which is smack dab in the middle of Savannah's historic district, but it actually looks like it belongs in the New Orleans French Quarter. Now, we know a lot of these older estate-like buildings went on to be converted into hotels or bed and breakfasts and all kinds of stuff like that. But this place was actually built as an upscale hotel. I'm having a call come in. I can't go there right now, though. It was high-end to begin with. It comes with a killer bar, fine dining restaurant, and classy lobby with marble floors and all kinds of other eccentric details. So the Marshall House Hotel was built in 1851 by Mary Marshall, and it sits on a piece of ground that her dad, Gabriel Lever, had bought, and he actually passed it down to her when he died. So when Mary built this hotel, it was considered to be the finest structure in Savannah. But that wasn't good enough. She had to keep adding all these high-end features like cast iron balconies and a veranda. And Mary ran the hell out of this little place too. It was like the high-end hangout back in the day. But eventually she got tired of dealing with the public, so she sold the place to the Geigers, who in turn sold the place to the Gilberts in 1933. And in 1945 it was closed, but it didn't stay that way. In 1946, the hotel reopened as the Marshall, but it was closed again in 1956. And in 1999, major renovations were made, and the joint was reopened as a luxury hotel. I told you all this so I can tell you all of that. So we got the history down. Let's talk about the hauntings on this sucker, right? So before the Marshall reopened, the staff and the construction workers were reporting all kinds of crazy shit that was going on there. We already know here that when you go to renovate or remodel one of these old houses or estates, that just kind of stirs things up. And yeah, the ghosties don't like that too much. So yeah, the madness begins there. Well, these folks were all complaining about what they called bad vibes in room 214, 314, and 414, which is kind of weird, right? Because they're all like just above each other or in line underneath each other. So for starters, those rooms stank to high hell. They did everything under the sun to try to get the funk out of these rooms, but it wasn't budging, y'all. Having exhausted every known means to mankind to remove this foul odor, they resorted to some pretty drastic measures. First, they were attempting to hold these group prayers in the room, but the stench would become so overwhelming that everybody had to get the hell out. So then they tried the next best thing. They stuck these radios in the rooms and tuned them in the gospel stations. And for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, religious music was being blared into these rooms. And guess what? It freaking worked. So now the funk's gone. They start noticing all these other things going on in the joint. And one of the most vivid and most frequently reported phenomena was the sounds of children playing on the upper levels. There's a very distinct sound of their little bitty footsteps and laughing, along with the sound of a bouncing ball, was constantly being reported by staff, guests, and of course the construction workers who were still on site. So some of these guests have had different encounters with the kids there too. One dude in particular, he wakes up several times during the middle of the night with his feet being tickled. So the dude's exhausted, he's half comatose, and he keeps thinking that it's the down comforter that's tickling his feet. So eventually he just kicks all the covers off the bed and goes back to sleep. Well, the next time it happens, the dude springs up in the bed, looks down at his feet, and there's a little girl standing there at his feet. She'd been tickling his toes with her fingers. And the second he locks eyes with her, she just vanished into thin air. So other folks have been woke up in the middle of the night by the feeling of a cold hand being pressed up against their forehead, like somebody's checking you for fever or something. And that actually could have been the case because there's a whole lot of historical documents that say this joint was occupied by Sherman's troops during the Civil War. So for the last few months of the war, it was used as a hospital for Union soldiers. And that leads to a rather macabre discovery that went down during these major renovations in 1999. Check this out. This is crazy, y'all. So while their work's going on in these lower levels, there's a crew there that's they're there on site to restore the hardwood floors. Well, in this one room in particular, there's a spot of boards that looked really bad, looked like they'd already been replaced once, but they were rotten. So, of course, they're going to pull them up and replace them and start over. So these poor bastards start yanking up the floorboards, and guess what they find under there? They find human remains. But the weird thing was, it wasn't like corpses or skeletons or anything. It was just pieces parts. So the authorities come to investigate, and the joint looks like a crime scene, and all of these parts are being cataloged and taken out. There were arms and hands and feet and legs, and all of them had these weird scars on them where they had been hacked off of the owner's bodies. So they run these tests on them, and when these chemical tests came back from the lab, the results showed that all the bones dated back to the Civil War era. So yeah, you guys have probably already figured it out. That room in particular was used as an operating room, and obviously there were more than just a couple of amputations that went down in there. And y'all know that hauntings take root in places where there's been a lot of drama or trauma. And imagine this. You're going through any kind of surgery is madness, as it is, right? Well, imagine being carted off the battlefield because your leg or your arm screwed up from cannon blast or gunfire. You get in the air and there's this blood-soaked doctor that's telling you, sorry, there's no anesthesia. And before you can say, oh, hell no, somebody shoves a bullet between your teeth for you to clamp down on while you're in agony. By the way, that is where the term bite the bullet came from. And then 4 or 5 big-ass dudes come and pin your ass down to the table, and you think you're panicked now. No, that doesn't set in until you look up and you see this doctor bust up with a handsaw and he's headed straight to you. So the doctor hacks away at whatever limb it is he's targeted, and a few minutes later it's gone. Then as an added bonus, they stuff your nub full of sawdust or lint or whatever it was they had laying around. And luckily, if you're still conscious, you know that's what they're doing. But if you are still conscious, and if they have some on site, you might get a shot of whiskey there just to knock the edge off. Thanks for that, right? So, yeah, that shit is hellish, needless to say. And I'm sure then, you know, probably more than a couple of those patients didn't pull through. I suspect gangrene was probably running rampant at that point in time. So yeah, with all those body parts piling up, the doctors that worked there at the Marshall found a way to kind of speed up the cleanup process. They just pulled up a couple of floorboards and they started throwing the pieces parts in the hole. And these particular pieces, parts were left there at the Marshall as Civil War souvenirs for over 135 years. If it hadn't been for that massive renovation in 1999, nobody had ever known they were there. So today, where all of those rather crude surgeries went down, that is now the manager's office. How brutal is that, right? So as if management doesn't have enough madness to deal with to begin with, these poor bastards have more than their share. Not one single person who's been stationed in that room has avoided having some kind of paranormal experience there. Now, most of the time it's like unexplainable noises or the sound of phantom footsteps, but this one dude in particular had a really crazy encounter. This dude says that it was after hours. He'd let the last of the employees out, and the building was empty other than himself. So he goes to catch up on some paperwork, goes in his office, and he leaves the door open. Well, he glances up and he sees this man walking down the hall, walks right in front of the door, and he said he noticed that he was wearing a very long overcoat. It was dark blue, and he only had one arm. Well, it was like during the middle of summer, so that was weird to begin with. So he jumps up to find out who the hell he is and what the hell he's doing there, runs to the door, and by the time he gets to the threshold, there's no one there. So besides the madness that goes on in the operating room / manager's office, there's plenty of other stuff going on all over this hotel. There are unending reports from the guests and the staff of several distinct odors, old-timey music, swaying chandeliers, babies crying, and of course apparitions of those long dead, ranging from small children all the way up to war-worn soldiers. So it seems that most of the hauntings go down on the upper level, mainly the 4th floor. One guest had just arrived and unpacked one evening when she looks up to see this soldier and a little boy standing in a room. And the soldier looks her up and down and then looks at her, and he decides he's going to speak to her. And he told her to get out of his room, which she did real quick, fast, and in a hurry. There's other reports there where guests are being touched or petted while they're asleep. Some folks have reported seeing a dude sitting near the window on the 4th floor reading a book, and as soon as they lock eyes on him, he disappears into thin air. Or there's also a lady that's seen floating down that same hallway wearing a long white gown. Other folks have reported having heard and seen these kids laughing and playing in the hallways on all of those upper level floors. And the reports of encounters and experiences here at the Marshall are ongoing and unending. I think it's because even though the hotel's updated with the latest modern conveniences, many of those original fixtures are still there, like the chandeliers and the doors and the trim and clawfoot tubs in every room. Those are the original furnishings, as well as the original furniture that's there. And those things are like magnets to spirits. And this place is full of both of them. So if you find yourself anywhere near Savannah for the weekend sometime soon, consider booking yourself a room at the Marshall. But make sure you bring your camera and your EVP recorder. Sounds like a pretty cool place to stay, right? Next up, there's this joint in Vicksburg, Mississippi that I want to tell you guys about. It's a bed and breakfast now that's known as Cedar Grove, which of course was once the main house to one of these huge plantations. Now, it was built by John Alexander Klein, who was a very successful jack of all trades. He was a jeweler and an architect, and he also had a whole bunch of side businesses like planting cotton and banking and timber. He had a whole bunch of pots in the fire, right? So, of course, old boy is loaded down, and he decides he's going to build himself a suitable home for somebody of his stature. So, construction on Cedar Grove started in 1840, and shortly after that, John met up with Elizabeth Day, who was a 14-year-old girl from New Orleans that was there visiting with her parents. Well, by the time Elizabeth turned 16, they're married. Now, when the estate was finished, John gave it to her as a wedding gift. But in the meanwhile, they had an extended honeymoon in Europe where they purchased a lot of the pieces that they would put inside the mansion when they got home. But at that time, when they got home, they were actually staying on the grounds in a guest house until the construction of the main house was finished in 1852. 12 years, y'all. That tells you something about this main house, right? Well, finally they get moved into the main house, but they were only able to enjoy it for about 10 years before the Civil War broke out. Well, the lives of everybody in that community were pretty much turned upside down, if not completely devastated. So many of these massive mansions and plantations in the area were destroyed as a result of the war, but Cedar Grove remained standing even with a cannonball embedded in one of the walls, which is still there to this day. Some folks say that it wasn't exactly a fluke that the estate remained virtually untouched. Now, John had been called off and he was forced to fight during this conflict, but Elizabeth and her unborn child had been sent after by a relative. General Sherman sent for her prior to the attack at Yazoo River. So when the shit was hitting the fan, she was safe in Union territory. Well, while she's away and the home was empty, the Union forces took it over and they were using it for a hospital for their wounded. And it said that General Ulysses Grant actually stayed there during that skirmish as well. So they actually lucked out and they had a home to return to that was basically intact, with the exception of the bloody mess that was left behind by all these dying soldiers. So there hadn't been a whole lot of looting because of Elizabeth was kin to, but the fact was that most of their family fortune was hidden in plain sight inside a secret compartment in a hutch that was sitting in the parlor. Well, after the war ended, John and Elizabeth got back together and they started adding to their family, and she actually wound up having 10 kids in all. 2 that died in infancy and a young daughter that died of some unknown illness, which of course was common back in that time, specifically due to the different plagues and the continued ravaging in that area. And of course, things weren't so sanitary during those days, and it was a hell of a bloody mess to clean up everywhere, in every household, in the streets, just everywhere. The corpses of these soldiers were piled up around indiscriminately. They were thrown into mass graves in order to get rid of the stench. Even after these homes had been cleaned thoroughly, you got to think, there wasn't any Clorox or Lysol back in the day, so their bloody, festering remains just seeped toxins into these plaster walls and wood floors, and the best they could do was smear it around a little bit with a wet rag and maybe some lye soap if they had some of that. So yeah, behind these soldiers came a whole new death wave. And anyway, John and Elizabeth's descendants wound up enduring, and they continued to call Cedar Grove home until 1919. Now, while the family was basically happy there, there'd been a whole lot of deaths inside that house through the years. Now, a lot of them were because of natural causes, but then there was also an accident. When one of John's sons was coming down the back stairs, he dropped the gun he was carrying, and the gun went off, and it shot this 17-year-old boy in the head, and of course he was killed there on site. So after the Kleins sold the property, it changed hands a whole lot of times, and just like most of these stories with these old estates, you know, they change hands, and every time they change hands, they seem to kind of fall further and further in deterioration. Well, one of these owners actually committed suicide in the ballroom. So you also have all of those families that are adding their trauma and drama to the grounds as well. Now, it was picked up in 1983. It was damn near in a state of ruin, and of course, they decided to renovate it. Sounds just like the first story we talked about, right? Yeah, you're waking up the ghosties. They don't like that. So in the 200 years that this home was actually a residence, the joint has seen more than its share of death and tragedy. Now, besides the passing of these family members and other owners that were also those countless Union soldiers that died these painful and gruesome deaths as a result of their war injuries, the Cedar Grove Bed and Breakfast is one of the largest in Mississippi. And of course, it's no big secret that it's crazy haunted. There are reports of manifestations that have been going on there for decades, and I'm happy to report that even though there's been a whole lot of encounters, investigations, sightings, documentation, not any one of those ghosts have ever tried to harm anybody. So that's pretty cool. So let's talk about those ghosts, right? Okay, first and foremost are the misty apparitions of both John and Elizabeth. Now, John's still overseeing everything that goes on there to this day. He's following the staff and the guests around 24/7 to make sure shit stays in line. Now, you're going to know it's him because you'll smell a smoking pipe. That was his vice, I guess. And they say that a lot of times he likes to hang out in that parlor. Now, Elizabeth is kind of fond of popping up on those front stairs. Those stairs were like her favorite spot in the entire house. They must have been really immaculate. But she's also known to be seen walking around in some of the upstairs bedrooms. And whenever she is seen, she's just kind of happy and going on about her business. Now, there have also been a whole lot of people who've reported hearing the sounds of children playing in this place as well. Their footprints or footsteps can be heard going up and down the stairs. And there's one room in particular on the second floor, the room where Elizabeth's youngest daughter died. where they seem to hear those little footsteps as well. Now, a lot of folks have claimed to have heard the sound of an infant crying in that room as well, so we kind of know where that came from. And of course, that 17-year-old boy, yeah, he's still hanging around there too. You can hear him on those back stairs retracing those final and fatal footsteps from time to time. Now, besides the Klein family, both staff and guests have encountered the misty form of some of these soldiers that are still hanging out there. Some of these folks report hearing the desperate and anguished cries of these men as they were laying and dying of their injuries or subjected to one of those crude impromptu surgeries, right? Well, in the ballroom, you're going to run into the spirit of that chick that shot herself. She's also known to make appearances right there on those front stairs where Elizabeth likes to show up as well. Now, in more recent sightings, housekeeping staff is reporting that when they're making these beds, they'll go back to do like a final room check, and there's a couple of rooms in particular where they'll look at the beds and you can see that it's indented like there's a body laying there. So they have to remake the beds, but I wonder if they sit and wait until the imprint of the body is gone, or if they kick the imprint of the body out of the bed and then remake them. I don't know. Anyway, so I think we've about got enough out of the haunted hotels and beds and breakfast for the night, right? So what about a haunted bar room? Let me guys tell you about the Oxford Saloon. Y'all are going to want to be there for happy hour, so check this out. This creepy little gym is in Washington. It was built in 1900. It was first known as the Blackman's Dry Goods Store. Now, after that, it became a saloon, but over the years, it's changed owners and uses many, many times, but the name Oxford always stuck with it. So when it was first remodeled as a saloon, the owners added this vestibule near the entrance where there was a stairway that led up to several rooms on the upper level. Now, those rooms were intended to be boarding house rooms, but that ain't how it went down. Because there was this chick named Catherine that made a deal with the owners, and it was turned into a very high-end bordello back in the day. Now, Catherine never really hung out in the saloon, but she did keep an office up there in the local Eagles Lodge. And that's where she sat and made all of the reservations for her clientele. Well, for the most part, her business was pretty much booming, and of course, her customers were happy. But not everybody was so thrilled with her little enterprise, because Catherine was murdered right there at the Oxford in one of those upstairs rooms. She was found decapitated in clawfoot tubs. So Catherine is still trying her damnedest to run that business. She's seen there at the Oxford still up until today. She appears as an older woman wearing a purple dress with purple bows in her hair. She's always on the upper levels, and she's always in high gear going from one room to the next. It's kind of like she's doing some kind of customer satisfaction survey or something, right? So I don't want you to get the wrong idea about old girl, because when I said everybody was thrilled with her booming little business, or not everybody was thrilled with her booming little business, there was a reason for that. A lot of Catherine's girls weren't there because they wanted to be. In fact, another of the frequently seen ghosts there was a chick named Amelia. Now, Amelia had been forced into prostitution and had somehow wound up becoming a ward of Catherine's. Well, one day she turns up dead. A maid finds her crumpled up in the bottom of one of those upstairs closets, and nobody really knows for sure if she was murdered or if she committed suicide. And right now, she ain't talking. So Amelia is still seen mostly on the upper level of the Oxford, but occasionally you will catch a glimpse of her downstairs. Now, she wasn't the first one to be murdered there, neither was Catherine, and she definitely wasn't the last. Records show that at least 10 folks died there, and there's no telling really how many folks actually did die there, because let's face it, nobody went to the trouble of filing a police report and going through investigations every time a corpse turned up back in the day, right? So it was pretty much get it moved out and let's get on with business, right? Well, there's one pretty well documented tale of murder here. Now, this dude's name was Henry, and he was actually a cop. that doubled at the Oxford as a bouncer on weekends. Well, one night this fight breaks out and Henry goes to break up the brawl, and apparently these dudes weren't through scrapping it out yet, and they didn't appreciate him interfering, so one of them pulled a knife and cut Henry, and he died on the spot. Well, Henry must not have any really hard feelings about it because he's still hanging out there today. And a lot of folks see him hanging around on the stairs that lead down to the basement. But I got to warn you guys, Henry's a freak. There's been more than a few chicks that have encountered him in the ladies' bathroom, and he has a tendency to pinch you on your ass. But apparently he's a little bit on the bashful side, because if you happen to catch a glimpse of him, he disappears immediately. Now, in 2005, the Washington State Ghost Society performed several investigations there at the Oxford. The team members, Sandy and Russ, investigated the second floor first. So after they set up all their equipment and they turn on their recorders, they start up the stairs. Well, Sandy was feeling like there was something hanging around with them up there, so she kept telling Russ, take pictures, take pictures. Well, while they were up there, other than feeling creeped out, nothing really happened. But when they got back downstairs and they replayed the recording that they'd captured, they found that they'd captured the sound of a small child laughing. And that wasn't all. A few times when Sandy was telling Russ to take pictures, there was a male voice on the recording that was mocking her. So before the investigation started, the manager had given these guys keys to all the offices on the top floor. Well, they tried several times to open these rooms, but the keys kept being pushed out of the locks by some unseen force before they could turn them. So eventually they did get a few of those doors open. But here's a crazy kicker. Now, during the time that they're trying to get those doors open and the keys are being shoved out of the holes, their recorders caught a voice saying, I dropped the keys to my room. And it was like the voice was mocking them. And of course, nobody heard the voice until they went back downstairs and replayed the recording. So now, according to legend, Amelia had lived and died in room 6. Now, nothing happened in that room during the investigation, but later on, Sandy and Russ rented that room and used it as an office. And that's when they had some pretty crazy experiences. There were several times that they left the room to go and run errands or go to lunch, and when they came back, they'd find that all of the furniture in the room had been rearranged. But back to the investigation. When they were finally able to get inside of room 4, they attempted to contact any spirits that were present there. Well, at the time of the investigation, they thought they'd struck out. But again, they replayed the recordings and they found that they actually got a response. There was again this strong male voice that spoke directly into the microphone, and he said, I am the one. During that same playback session, they found that they, when they left the second floor, they were followed by something or someone, and there was another voice that was captured that was issuing a warning to them that said, you're going to die. So when Russ and Sandy get downstairs, they meet up with these 2 other investigators, and they formed a little game plan, and then they went down to the lower bar and then to the basement where they got some killer evidence. Now, at the bottom of the basement stairs, Russ took 10 pictures looking back up the stairs. One of those pictures captured what looked like a man standing in front of the camera looking up the stairs. Another one showed the man turning toward the camera. Now, these were digital photos, and they had a professional photographer analyze them after the investigation. That dude determined that those pictures had not been altered after they were taken. And then there was one last occurrence at the end of the investigation. One of the group members had an encounter in the bathroom. So the dude is standing there taking a leak, and all of a sudden this male voice whispers in his ear and tells him to get out. Could have been worse, though, because it could have whispered, hey, boy, you look mighty fine in jeans. But anyway, so I actually did find another local pub there in Washington. I thought we'd talk about, being that we're hanging out in the area. It's got a crazy haunted little reputation as well. It's called Kell's Irish Pub. And that is sitting in Seattle, Washington. It was built back in the early 1900s. Now, Kells is said to be one of the most haunted pubs in America, and besides the typical regulars that hang out there, it's not unusual to run into paranormal investigators there as well. So what went down this little pub that made it such a crazy haunted location? You're going to love this. Y'all listen. So before Kells was open, the building that it's in, the Butterworth building, was said to have been the home of a very corrupt mortuary. Now, a lot of the spirits that hang out at Kells these days originated from this mortuary. Now, during the renovations that would result in Kells Pub being established there, a worker took photos during the remodel, and in one of these shots, he was surprised to see the image of a pale, dark-eyed man whose mouth was stitched shut. Madness, right? So, what went down in this mortuary to cause all this madness? Well, for starters, not all the people's bodies who passed through the doors between 1903 and 1923 arrived there willingly. See, back in the day during Seattle's gold rush, there was this huge influx of people showing up that were convinced they were going to strike it rich, right? Well, unfortunately, instead of finding gold, a lot of them found violent crime, disease, and death. And plague and diphtheria were running rampant in the filth-ridden streets. And then in 1918, all that funk was accompanied by the Spanish influenza. So since there wasn't anything such a thing like sanitation, the next best remedy was to burn soiled clothes and linens and whatever the sick or dead folks had come in contact with. Well, that created a whole other problem. A lot of shit got burned down. Some deliberately, but a lot of the buildings were destroyed by fires that just happened and got out of control. So besides the violence and illness and raging fires and mining accidents and all of the kind of other stuff that was going on there, pretty good reason for there to be some hauntings there. So while all this stuff's going down, bodies are filling the streets up. And in that, a local furniture maker named Butterworth saw another avenue to make bank. Butterworth already had his furniture store open, but so many people were dropping dead all over the place, there wasn't a whole lot of demand for a new kitchen table or a rocking chair, right? So old boy starts building coffins. Well, now he's struggling to keep up with demand, but he sees yet another opportunity to build his fortune. He converts his furniture store into a mortuary business instead. So because there's so many corpses piling up all over the community, Seattle started this new program. The city started paying residents $50 for every corpse they dragged into Butterworth's mortuary. So the person who transported the corpse got half the money and the mortician kept the other half. Well, again, Butterworth sees a way to increase his bottom line. And according to local legends, he had people killed for that $25 body bounty. Well, afterwards, he cremated the bodies, so if the police did try to investigate, there was nothing left to implicate foul play. So he was pretty freaking smart, right? Well, he had a pretty good gig going on, but of course, and as usual, the dude screwed it up by getting greedy. The authorities were on to him, but they just never could get enough evidence to move in. Now, they suspected he had to have had a partner in crime, and they suspected Dr. Linda Hazard. Now, we talked about this psycho bitch in the past. Remember her? She was the self-proclaimed doctor that opened these spas and treated these illnesses with these brutal-ass fasts. And she was basically starving her patients to death and siphoning all their cash off of them. But before they died, she would have them sign these documents that resulted in their estates being left to her upon their untimely death. So she's inheriting these patients' fortunes, sending their corpses over to Butterworth. He's getting paid to cremate the remains, which in turn destroyed any evidence against both him and Dr. Hazard. Pretty sweet deal, right? So in knowing all that crazy shit went down back there in the day, it kind of makes sense that folks see all kind of madness going on in Kells today. Now, there's tons of reports, not only by patrons, but by staff and managers, and of course, those paranormal investigators that hang out there. Now, one of the more frequently spotted spirits there is that of a little redheaded girl that's seen sitting on top of the stairs. Other folks, including musicians that have played gigs there at Kells, said that they've seen the image of this thin, tall male phantom wearing a long black cat and a top hat that pops up in front of folks and then suddenly disappears. There's also another ghostly regular here. It's the spirit of an old miner that was killed there after he shot a hole in the wall. Now, this spirit has no problem telling everybody how he got dead. He rants frequently to the staff and the guests that he was murdered by Butterworth and his cohorts. There's also the lingering presence of a disfigured child that's bound to the pub that nobody really knows what the story is there, but I'm betting that the kid probably got taken out for that $25 body bounty. A lot of paranormal investigators claim that both Mr. and Mrs. Butterworth are still haunting this joint today. And she's seen arranging flowers. And, of course, she's usually dressed to the T's because her old man's got money, right? And old man Butterworth, he's always seen wearing a suit and tie, and he's usually somewhere near his old office. Now, besides those ghosts, you can also catch a glimpse of a friendly male spirit who seems to get his kicks by appearing in mirrors behind the bar and smiling at you. And, of course, a whole lot of folks have seen what they describe as hands clawing at the windows from outside the building. And that's creepy as hell after you had a couple shots of Cuervo, right? Well, with all this crazy shit that's going on, the pub's bartender actually keeps a bottle of holy water behind the bar just in case the shit gets out of hand. Now, besides all this madness that we've just mentioned, owners and staff alike have reported smelling formaldehyde, which, of course, is a chemical that's used in the embalming process. There have also been these mirrors that have shattered for no reason, as well as glasses that keep getting flung from the bar or falling from off the bar when nobody's anywhere near them. There's also the typical phantom footsteps, whispering voices, and knocking, but there is one unique feature that the ghosts here like to pull off in front of a full house upon occasion. Sometimes the tavern's bar napkins unexplainably burst into flames. That's one hell of a little bonus right there. So there's 2 haunted bar rooms where you may want to go and do a few shots if you're anywhere nearby. I think we'll move on to a haunted hotel in Alberta, Canada real quick, and we'll wrap the night up from there. So the Banff Springs Hotel was built in 1888, and it seems that the latest newfangled means of transport was a hit. Yeah, everybody and their grandmama was jumping on a train to go see the countryside or visit relatives. And, of course, there were always business trips, too. Well, keep in mind that even though trains were a hell of a lot faster than horse and buggy, they weren't exactly efficient. And sometimes folks would get on at one stop and get off, and then they'd have to wait for days for either another train that's heading in the direction of where they're going or some other means of transportation. So there was a new need in these communities where the train stopped, and one of those needs, of course, were hotels. So 130 years ago, the Banff was open, but it wasn't just the run-of-the-mill roadside flop house. It was crazy high-end for the day. In fact, it was such a majestic creation that it was nicknamed the Castle of the Rockies. And like bees to honey, the rich and famous and infamous flocked there. So a few of the notable guests that actually stayed there were Queen Elizabeth II, Marilyn Monroe, and Helen Keller, which I'm kind of baffled on the last one because really they could have stuck that chick in a barn and told her she was at the Hilton and she wouldn't have known any different. But anyway, like I was saying, a lot of distinguished guests came and went, but a lot of them actually stayed on and are still there today. Now, one of the most haunted spots in the hotel is room 873. Legend has it that this dude lost his shit in this room. He murdered his wife and his daughter before he committed suicide. Now, today the room seems to be missing, but if you go and you start looking for it, go upstairs to room 993 and then go downstairs to room 773, and you see that they're right, or 773 and 973, they're aligned. And above each door on all doors on all the floors, there's a light. Well, when you go back to room 873, or where it should be, the light is there, but there's no door. Well, if you really look hard, you'll notice that there's a baseboard cut, that there are seams right there that are about the same width as a door. And if you knock either side of where that baseboard's cut, it's pretty solid, but if you knock in the center, you can tell that it's hollow. If you ask the staff, they're not going to admit where it's at. And of course, the savvy hotel guests, you know exactly where it's at, but you can't exactly bust through that wall right there to check out room 873, because we go to jail for that kind of shit, right? So anyway, there were a few guests that actually got to stay in room 873 before it got sealed up, and they had some horrific experiences. The crazy thing is that all of their experiences were pretty much the same. They were all asleep, and they were woke up in the middle of the night by these shrieks and these screams. And once they're good and awake, they decide to look around the room and see what's going on, and they see these bloody handprints on the walls and on the door. So they freak the hell out. They call the main desk, but by the time anybody can get there, all the handprints had disappeared. Other guests have actually reported seeing the spirit of the little girl standing outside the room, looking around as if she's lost. Of course, there's no door there anymore, so somebody that doesn't know the backstory wouldn't exactly know why that little girl's just standing there in the hallway under that light where there's no door. Now, the doomed family of room 873, of course, are not the only ghostly inhabitants here. There is also another very infamous guest called the Ghost Bride. Now, way back in the day, the Banff was still smelling of fresh lead-based paint. There was a wedding there. Now, the bride was walking down the stairs to join her groom, and somehow she lost her footing, and she started tumbling backwards. And as she's falling, her dress catches onto one of the candelabras and brings it down on top of her and catches the dress on fire. And don't worry, she didn't suffer a whole lot from the flames, because by the time she stopped, her neck was broken and she was already dead. So, ever since, guests have claimed to see her ghostly image dressed in her wedding gown. Now, some folks see her on the staircase, and some folks actually see her in the ballroom. But most of the folks that see her actually report that her wedding dress was on fire. Now, the legend of the Ghost Bride has become so famous that she even has her own Canadian postage stamp and collector coin. Now, not all the ghostly inhabitants here were guests, though. A lot of folks have had encounters with Sam Macaulay. Now, Sam was a Scottish bellman who was way into his job. And in fact, while he was still alive, he used to joke around that he loved the hotel so much that when he died, he was going to come back and haunt the joint. And, well, he did just that. So a lot of guests have arrived at the Banff to be greeted by this friendly Irish bellman who's always eager to help. They ask questions and he answers and gives directions and gives them a little history. And the guest goes to give him a tip, and he disappears right there before their eyes. So that's cool. Pocket that tip and move right on, because that's just the way he rolls. All right, so that's about a wrap for tonight. We've talked about a couple of haunted bed and breakfast plantations, haunted pubs, and a haunted hotel. So we've covered a whole lot of ground tonight. But before I sign off, I do have a couple of reminders for you. Make sure you download the Edge Radio US app. You can find the link for that at authorlyngibson.com under the Edge Radio tab. There is some badass rock and roll streaming there, folks, so don't miss out on that. The app is absolutely free. Also, while you're on my page, make sure you sign up for the Creepy Crate. Don't screw around. You do not want to miss out on this next crate. I told you I got a little heads up on what's going to be inside. Trust me. Sign up, and don't forget, when you go to checkout, use the code TWISTED for an additional $5 off. And last but certainly not least, if there's any haunted history or urban legends that you want to hear about on the show, inbox me on Facebook at Southern Horror Queen and tell me about them. And maybe we'll do a segment on those, and I'll give you a shout out live and on the air. All right, so no more scary for you tonight. I'll see you guys back here next week. And in the meanwhile, y'all keep it creepy, because you know I will. Y'all have a good night.